Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Whoop, 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 whoop. Gravity. It's not just a good idea, it's the law. So, ladies and gentlemen, and other non binary folks, how do you do? I'm Peter Alexievich, and this is the Live at 5 from Kyiv, bringing you all the latest happenings from on the ground here in this major European capital that is under siege. Whoever you are, wherever you are, welcome. Whenever it is for you, for me, it is just past midnight on Tuesday, October 15th, which makes this the news for Monday, October 14th, day 965 of Vladimir Putin's war of aggression against the people of Ukraine. And I see that the peeps are coming in. Hey, Flip. Hey, PH. Hey, Maryland. How you doing? Hey, Mad Mike. Andrew. In UZK. Are you in Uzbekistan? That's not the time in Uzbekistan. Hey, Fitz. Hey, Anthony, Tommy, Tom, Bobby. How you doing, bud? Hey, Cheyenne. Andrew's in the UK. Hey, Mel. Hey, Eli. How you doing, Eli? Hey, Rob Walker. Hey, Andy. How's everybody doing tonight? The peeps are coming in. I'll tell you guys something funny. Funny is not the right word, but it is odd. You know, last night was the first night in 48 nights that we did not have a missile or drone attack against Ukraine. Not just Kyiv, but the whole country. There were no drones come in last night. And for the life of me, I could not sleep all night. I was literally up until dawn last night. Just could not sleep. And that is in contrast to last week. I swear to God, this is true. I was having trouble sleeping. It was about 3:30 in the morning. I'm laying in bed. I can't get to sleep. And all of a sudden, I hear the anti-air guns, right? The Gepards going off. And I hear the explosions of drones and ballistic missiles over the city. I swear to God, I was asleep in 2 minutes. It's unreal. Honest to God, Fitz, the human beings can adapt to just about anything. It is crazy. Hey, Angela, how you doing? So, ladies and gentlemen, and other non-binary folks, I got some news here that is, frankly, in my opinion, the biggest escalation of this war to date. The Institute for War Research asserts that North Korean troops are already in Ukraine. On top of that assertion from the Institute for War Research, we have eyewitness accounts from the SROK, which is a partisan group operating in Donetsk. The name translates roughly as death to Russian occupiers and collaborators. These guys claim that there are at least 3 emergent bases being constructed or in use in and around Mariupol for the training of North Korean soldiery. That there are currently North Korean troops in the temporarily occupied territories, that they are doing live fire exercises of artillery, likely using North Korean ammunition, and that they are training up North Korean troops to join the fight. Now, this is corroborated by the ATACMS hit, or I'm sorry, it may have been HIMARS. I would have to check. But there was a Ukrainian strike last week on one of these training grounds that unalived at least 6 North Korean officers, according to the Ukrainian MOD. That evidence suggests that we are at an inflection point, a critical inflection point of escalation in this war. As so many geopolitical experts have been saying since the start of this conflict, that if we fail to deal with Putin and his blackmail, if we fail to stop him here, It will only be a green light to the mullahs in Iran and the Kim regime in North Korea and the Chinese in Beijing that they can do as they please. They can threaten as they will to get what they want. And here's the evidence. You've got an expanding war in the Middle East, which we know was funded and supported through the proxies in Iran by the Kremlin, that these people were armed and trained and supported by the Kremlin. We can see that Tehran is increasingly aggressive in its stance, having now committed 2 direct ballistic missile attacks on Israel. We see the North Koreans increasingly threatening South Korea, accusing the South Koreans of flying drones and dropping leaflets over the country. We see them testing over the Sea of Japan with ballistic missiles. And we hear more rhetoric coming out of North Korea than we have in recent years. And now there is the potential for uniformed troops of the Democratic People's Republic of North Korea on the ground assisting the Russians in Ukraine. This is a major escalation of this war, and it is not to be taken lightly. We in the West, we talk all the time about not wanting to escalate. We put these limitations on ourselves and our Ukrainian allies because we suffer from this delusion that Putin can be appeased. He can't be. He cannot be. The Russians have no problems escalating this conflict, and you can see them doing it on the ground with North Korean troops in uniform firing North Korean artillery shells and ballistic missiles at the people of Ukraine every day. This is insanity. It is insanity. And we won't even let the Ukrainians use the weapons we've given them to strike the air bases where the glide bombs come from that are killing Ukrainians every day. It's gotta stop. The Russians have essentially escalated this by involving uniformed North Korean troops in a way that is unimaginable to us. And yet there it is. The Russians have done everything to escalate this thing. They have funded and supported Hamas's war in Israel, which has now expanded to include Lebanon. They are encouraging and supporting North Korean aggression, funding the Kim regime with their arms purchases. They have increased sabotage and assassination attempts and cyber attacks against the West. They see the West as an enemy, and they are actively trying to destabilize us. Make no mistake. While we sit here and quibble over authorizing the Ukrainians' use of weapons that we've already given them, this masochistic self-flagellation has to stop if we are to preserve the post-World War II peace and prosperity of a rules-based order that is threatened by these genocidal lunatics in the Kremlin. That is my opinion, based on the facts on the ground here in Ukraine. There is good news in all of this. Hey, Paul, there is good news today. It's not all bad news. Ukraine has reported that its drone strike success rate is near 80%, according to David Kirashenko, writing for the Henry Jackson Society. Kirashenko claims that improvements are driven by the Palantir AI built into Ukrainian drones, allowing the drones to seek out and identify targets like tanks, artillery, and even Russian troops based on uniforms, weapons, and movements. With this Palantir AI, adaptive generative software, the ratio, the hit rate gets near 80%, as opposed to 10% for novice UAV operators and 50% for the most experienced Ukrainian operators. That's a substantive increase based on the AI. I see Jason Willis-Starrin is here. Jason, we were just talking about AI driving success for the Ukrainians. And here we have this report from Kirashenko telling us that that's exactly what's happening on the front line. The Russian terror campaign has taken a new turn today. Now, they didn't hit the country last night with missiles and drones, at least not overnight. There was a daylight missile attack on Odessa, which we'll talk about in a second. But what we saw today was all over the country, dozens and dozens of calls were placed to schools, government buildings, ministries, including the Ministry of Culture here in Kyiv, shopping centers, all calling in bomb threats, saying that the facility had been mined and that people were in danger. So this new tactic of the Russians allows them to terrorize the population, disrupt daily life, throw everybody's day into chaos for nothing more than the cost of a phone call. There appears to be no truth to any of it. No devices were found in any of the locations that were called. No explosions happened. No sabotage seems to have occurred. At least not yet. We know that there are Russian agents operating inside of Ukraine all over the place. They have the ability to do these things, and so these calls have to be taken seriously. But right now, it looks as though today's calls were all just bluff and bluster, just like every word that comes out of Putin's mouth. Again, the great bluff, the great successful bluff that Putin has perpetrated on all of us in the West is that he can be appeased, that he can be stopped, that there is something we can do for him that will stop him. This is a lie. And we can't give into it. We cannot give into it. We've talked about how when Putin began this campaign of terror against the people of Ukraine, he looked at the West and he said to us, he threatened us with the 3 F's, right? We've talked about this before on this channel, the 3 F's, fuel, fire, and famine. He said, you will freeze if I cut off the fuel to Europe, and I will cut it off if you interfere. He said the world will starve. I will cut off the food coming out of Odessa. And if you really get in my way, you will all see the fire of nuclear fission. He threatened us with food insecurity, fuel insecurity, and nuclear blackmail. You can't give in to these people. We saw him do 2 of the 3. We've seen him cut off supplies of gas to Europe and oil to Europe. We saw him threaten the grain corridor, and now he's back at that again. In the last week, there have been 3 hits against ships taking grain out of Odessa, and today was a 4th hit. 2 ships were hit in Odessa by ballistic missiles. One flagged, it was the Optima, which was the Paolo flagged ship that was hit last week. It got hit again today. And then a Belize flagged ship called the NS Moon was also hit. Grain houses were hit, cargo cranes were hit, storage facilities were hit, and essential port infrastructure was hit in this ballistic missile attack. 1 person was unalived, 9 were injured in this attack. In international news, Biden, as we know, I was very excited because Biden called for a leader-level Ramstein group meeting. and then because of Hurricane Milton, had to cancel it. That meeting, it appears, is not going to happen now. Instead, tomorrow Biden is flying to Germany to meet Scholz, and they'll have a meeting between the two of them. But it will not be a leader-level conference of the Ukraine Contact Defense Group, which is a shame. It's bad timing. I don't think Biden did the wrong thing staying in the U.S. through Milton. But it is too bad that those 50 heads of state are not going to be in one room under the leadership of America for a change, it's disappointing to me as an American how so much of our leadership role has been abnegated in this conflict. And I applaud the British, who have really been at the forefront, the cutting edge of support for Ukraine, as have the French and the Germans. Again, in international news, Lithuania is militarizing its border with Russia. They're worried, as well they should be. And so what we see is the bridges and roads into Russia all along the border are being reinforced. The border's been closed for the most part. And the bridges and roads are being reinforced with dragon's teeth and hedgehogs out of concern for a Russian incursion into Lithuania. And we know the Baltics are on the list. I think if Ukraine had fallen, it would be Moldova next, then the Baltics. But now that Ukraine is not a direct path to Transnistria, it could be that the Russians are turning their attention to the Baltics. Or at least the folks in the Baltic are concerned that they will be the next to suffer the gentle mercies of the Russians. To this point, the German intelligence chief today reported that Russia will be capable of attacking NATO by 2030, that Putin is obsessed with creating a new world order, and that by 2030, the Russian military could be rebuilt and such an attack would be possible. In the meantime, Russia contents itself with cyber attacks and online attacks and sabotage against the West. Today, Meta, the parent company of Facebook and Instagram, reported that it had cracked and broken up a large Russian influence operation in Moldova that was using its platform to promote anti-Western, anti-EU sentiments in Moldova. We know that in Moldova, in addition to this influence operation, that the Russians have literally been buying votes for the upcoming election. $15 million transferred to 130,000 Moldovans, paying them off for their vote for pro-Kremlin political forces inside of Moldova. What does this say? I can't read my own writing. Oh. We have reports today of more war crimes committed by the Russians. It is being reported, and there is video being widely circulated on Telegram, that 9 unarmed and naked Ukrainian POWs in the Kursk direction were summarily executed. We have seen increasing reports of the summary execution of captured Ukrainians in violation of the Geneva Convention and the common rules of war. And the question becomes, is this now policy? Are the Russians now executing a policy of take no prisoners? Because we are seeing evidence of these crimes up and down the Eastern Front in Ukraine and now in Kursk inside of Russia. It's inconceivable to me. Ukraine has announced the destruction in a GUR operation executed by partisans who burned a Tu-134 military transport aircraft at the Orenburg 2. Oh, what the hell is that? Where'd that come from? Is that you, Dive Hard? I look good as a jack-o'-lantern. Some would say better than as me. Hey, Travis, how you doing, pal? Okay. So these Tu-134s, I guess these are great planes. They're big planes. The Russians have built and sold over 800 of them. They're operated by commercial airlines all over the world in 42 countries, or they were up until about 2006. And so they were a very successful, probably one of the most successful commercial airliners to ever come out of the Soviet Union. And the Russian military maintained some of them for transporting brass and, high-level managerial kind of people around Russia. Well, in Orenburg, which is 1,000 kilometers, 600 miles from the Ukrainian border, there's video been released of partisans that broke into the airbase and lit this thing on fire, and the thing burns. So they're not in production. It's not replaceable. It's not something that the Russians can replace. And it's unclear to me. I was unable to determine how many of this type are still in operation in Russia. In Germany, if we turn to Germany, yeehaw, for a second, though the election for Chancellor of Germany is still a year away, it's next September, Scholz is facing some competition from a guy named Friedrich Merz, who's the German opposition party candidate for the CDU. Merz says that he would give Ukraine Taurus missiles. So he is running on a platform of opening up Taurus missile delivery to Ukraine. That's good news for Ukraine. That puts pressure on Scholz to get on board with long-range weapons deliveries to Ukraine, and that moves the needle for all of us to uncuff the Ukrainians and permit long-range missile strikes deep into Russian territory, which is, of course, our fondest hope and wish for the Ukrainians. And we hope that it's not a fucking Christmas present, that they can get this sooner than that. In London, the Brits have started an investigation, what's it called? We'll use the word investigation. That's not quite the right word. An official inquiry into the death of Dawn Sturgis. Miss Sturgis was a mother of three who happened across a perfume bottle. Unknown to her, that perfume bottle contained enough Novichok nerve poison to kill thousands of British folks. Thousands. According to the British MOD, that vial of nerve poison was enough to kill thousands of British citizens. And it was discarded in the most negligent and thoughtless fashion so that this mother of three could pick it up. And she then died. This was during the time, this was back in 2018, Dark Irish. Do you remember the Salisbury Novichok attack, where a Russian double agent that had been working for the British, he was living there with his daughter, and they were attacked with Novichok. They both survived because they immediately sought care. And socialized medicine saved them, I will mention to everybody who's against universal health care. Socialized medicine managed to save them from that poison. So London has launched an inquiry into this death and the negligent way in which this Russian toxin was left lying around and resulted in the death of a British citizen on British soil. Anybody who thinks the Russians are not our enemies and are not actively engaged in terror and sabotage and murder against us is not paying attention. You're not paying attention if you think fucking Russia is anybody's friend but their own. Let's take a look at the front line. We'll start up in the north in Kursk, and then we'll move south. Up in Kursk, the Russians continue to advance in the Koronevo and Sudza directions. So from both the west and the east, the Russians are advancing on that Ukrainian salient. The Ukrainians are estimated to be outnumbered 3-1. And we have seen the overall territory under Ukrainian control drop from about 1,200 square kilometers to about 800 square kilometers. So Russia is on the move. Down south of Kupiansk, the Russians are still pushing toward the Oskil River, and they are within a stone's throw of the river now. They've narrowed that gap from about 3 kilometers to less than 2. In Donetsk, attacks on Chasiv Yar have been repelled, but the pressure is on. And Russian aviation is now targeting the rear of the Ukrainian forces in Chasiv Yar rather than the front line. I'm not sure what the implications of that change in targeting imply. Probably they're going after troop concentrations in the rear and logistics lines, trying to disrupt the front. In Toretsk, there is fierce building to building, house to house, block to block, dynamic urban warfare taking place. Again, Ukraine is outnumbered about 3-1 in the Toretsk direction, and the Russians are pushing hard. Hey, Robbo. Russia advances about 1 kilometer northwest of New York, so just south of Toretsk. The Russians have consolidated their gains around New York and have pushed about 1 kilometer deeper toward Toretsk. In the Pokrovsk direction, they're not moving directly toward Pokrovsk. They're expanding the salient north and south. In the north, about 800 meters were gained in the last 24 hours. In the south, about 400 meters. Ukrainian armed forces are counterattacking and have reclaimed some positions, but the fighting there is fierce. The Russians are desperate to make up as much ground as they can before the mud comes and freezes this conflict for the winter. The weather in Donetsk is not looking good for this week. Overnight temperatures are dropping to like single digits for Celsius. That's about 40 for Fahrenheit. And there is rain expected. That is going to make this messy and hard for everybody. Hey, Parda. In the Korotkove direction, Russia maintains pressure, but they are not advancing. Russia's starting to advance. They're re-energizing dormant parts of the front. So we see them advancing on Velika Novosilka and Robotyne down in Zaporizhia. In Kherson, we have more evidence today of the human hunt, the human safari that Russian drone operators are committing against the people of Kherson. And these idiots take the video and publish it online of their own war crimes. Somebody published video of themselves tracking down a civilian on a moped, some young kid on a moped, struck by a drone, and targeting a UNHCR, that's a UN Human Rights Commission vehicle with a drone. And then they published the video on their Telegram channel. It's insanity. Insanity. Exactly, Rational Squirrel. What don't we have evidence for? I mean, you can think about what's been dug up in Bucha. There's mass graves all over this country that will need forensic analysis in the coming years if there is any hope of prosecuting any of these criminals. Yeah, no, I know, Dark Irish. The UN is flaccid and impotent, and it's a sin. All right, so guys, for the top line news, that's it for me. So now we'll go to Q&A. The first thing, I saw a question in there about the F-16 Su-34, because the Russians are saying, hey, Zub, thank you, Travis. Nice to see you, pal. Good to see you. Hang on to that thought, Bobby. Let me answer that next. There was a story this weekend that emerged this weekend. The Russian Telegram channel Fighter Bomber said eternal rest to an Su-34, I think it was an Su-34 pilot, and confirmed the downing of a Russian fighter bomber. But that's the only confirmation we have. Another Telegram channel, other Telegram channels, it wasn't just the one, reported that that fighter bomber had been shot down about 50 kilometers from the front line over the temporarily occupied territories by, thanks, Richard, an Su-34, by an F-16. Now, if this is true, this would be the first time that we've seen a dogfight between Russian and Ukrainian forces using an F-16. And it would be the first time that we saw an F-16 shoot down an a Russian plane of any kind. But we don't have any, but the only sources we have for this are the Russians. So you can't trust the Russian sources, right? But why would the Russians say this? Well, that's a tricky question. They may believe it. It may be a cover story for the fact that it was friendly fire. We've had lots of friendly fire situations where the Russians shoot down their own planes. Hell, the Russian air defense guys have such itchy trigger fingers, they just shot down a crop duster. Where was that? I want to say, I'm not sure. It was someplace in the North Caucasus, if I'm not mistaken, which is not even near the front line. But these guys have such itchy trigger fingers. They shot down a crop duster, for crying out loud, afraid that it was a drone. We have reports that 2 small airplanes, Cessna types, were shot down over the Murmansk region because air defense were afraid that they were Ukrainian drones. So it could be that this is a friendly fire incident, and the Russians shot it down, and they're just blaming the Ukrainians. Now, I'll tell you, some of those posts, and again, it's tough to say because I don't speak Russian. So I have to translate these posts through Google Translate, right? And you see them when I do the videos, right? You see the original post in Russian and then the Google Translate version. And in the case of this, there is an almost hysterical tone to some of these posts. There is an implicit fear that the F-16s outclass the Russian jets. There is a concern among the Russians that the F-16s are flying and that they are hunting Russian jets. That much is clear from the hysterical tone of some of these posts. And that's good for the Ukrainians. So we still don't know. Was it an F-16? Was it a friendly fire incident? We may never know. Okay, now, Bobby, what was your question? I said I would do your question next. Bobby suggests if Russian glide bombs are down, this would indicate the Su-34 was shot down by Ukraine, you think. That might be an indicator of that. However, it appears that glide bomb runs are back up. So legitimately, Bobby, we saw the glide bomb after the Kursk incursion. It seemed like they were bombing Kursk more. And the glide bomb drops on the front line dropped. I don't have the exact numbers, but the word that I'm getting is that they've increased again. And so the front line is again being targeted by the Russians using glide bombs. And in fact, for the first time, we've seen glide bombs targeting Zaporizhia, the city of Zaporizhia, as the Russians attempt to push forward in Zaporizhia and try to make some advance before mud season. Now, who do I think mud season benefits? I mean, again, you guys know I'm not a military analyst, but as an amateur who watches all of this closely, I think you're right, Bobby. I think that mud season benefits the Ukrainians more than the Russians. It slows down the attacks, the forward momentum of the Russians. It could even drain that forward momentum. It could give the Ukrainians a little bit of a respite, a chance to play the political game, get through to the U.S. elections. And dear God, by the grace of God and the self-preservation instinct of the American people, I hope and pray that Kamala Harris gets in there and we're not looking at Trump. Because if Kamala Harris gets in there, I think we're going to see support for Ukraine explode. And I think that we'll see the gloves come off. And I think we'll see the authorization of long-range weapon strikes into Russia. I think that that's the future. So mud season, slowing the conflict, slowing the aggressor, giving the Ukrainians a chance to breathe, and securing them in Kursk, before, right? Because if they're not out of there in the next 2 weeks, if the Russians can't throw them out in the next 2 weeks, they're going to be there till spring at least, in my opinion. It seems impossible that they won't be. Hey, Brock Smith, how you doing, pal? Do you think the South Koreans will be drawn into the conflict farther? That all depends on Kim, doesn't it? That all depends on Kim. I don't see how South Korea gets... I mean, South Korea is not going to put boots on the ground just because the North Koreans did. But the South Korean defense sector, which has been slow to sell weapons to Ukraine, even though they make some of the best weapons in the world, might just come around. And we might see South Korea come in with some weapons packages, with some support from some lethal support for the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians still are suffering from a shell inequality. Even at the current rate of 3 shells to 1, the Russians are outshelling the Ukrainians 3 to 1. And if the North Koreans come through with a whole bunch more artillery shells, then that's only going to get worse. And it concerns me that these training bases that the North Koreans appear to be building around Mariupol are doing live fire artillery training, because that would seem to belie the notion that the Russians are short on either ammunition or artillery pieces. If they're doing live fire training exercises with North Korean troops in Donetsk, as they appear to be, that's a problem. That's a concern. And maybe the mill bloggers who are complaining about Russian shell hunger on the front are just part of a psyop, right? That's not a real thing. And just because the rate of fire is down doesn't necessarily translate. That could be strategic. It doesn't necessarily translate to the Russians are running out of or rationing shells. They got deep pockets. Your mop, this war was over before it started. You are right. You are right. Putin lost this war early on. The fact that he has to turn to North Korea for weapons and troops is an admission of that failure. The fact that Finland and Sweden are in NATO is an admission of that failure. He's expanded the border with NATO, right? His whole thing was stop NATO advance. And yet the border with NATO is expanded 1,000 kilometers. It's a failure. It's a failure on every level. John, I don't think that that's true. So John is suggesting that if this conflict has expanded and North Korean troops have boots on the ground, surely NATO will join in. Nah, there is not a big appetite in NATO to put boots on the ground. There's barely an appetite in NATO to remove long-range weapons restrictions. Everybody is afraid of Russia and its 6,000 nuclear warheads. Now, Bobby asks a great question, something that I did not report on and have not done a video on, I don't think. Dominoes to watch. Kadyrov. Kadyrov has publicly stated that he's in a blood feud with the Dagestanis. Now, Dagestan is one of the republics in the Russian Federation. Oh, it's not fair, John. Nothing about this is fair. But think about what an accomplishment it is that Ukraine against Russia with every advantage, has been stopped dead in their tracks and in fact been pushed back from day one in the initial invasion. They had 25% of this country. They now today have 18.28% of this country. Now in August, now think about that for a second, right? They lost 7% of the country to the Ukrainians already. Remember, they had 10% of it since 2014, since the Donbass war started. So they've actually only gained 8.28% of the country. How much of the country did they have in August? Because for the last 2 months, we've seen all this talk about Russian gains, Russians advancing, Russians pushing forward, right? In August, they had 18.18% of the country. Here we are 3 months later, and they have 18.28% of the country. All of these Russian advances you're hearing about translate to 0.1% of the country. I mean, it's nothing. And then if you take into account the fact that they lost 800 kilometers in Kursk, they're actually in a negative. So it's nonsense. I know, Russell, it's killing me. It's killing me. Because all of the quibbling and waffling in the West, all it does is result in more Ukrainian lives lost. And an emboldened Kim regime in North Korea, communist regime in Beijing, and the mullahs in Iran. They are emboldened, make no mistake. King Leonidas, this guy thinks he's a Spartan, and he claims that Russia's fighting more than 20 countries. What a load of horse shit that is. Russia is fighting Ukraine, and Ukraine is kicking their ass. Make no mistake. Sorry, Nightshade. Let's go back to Dagestan. So Dagestan and Chechnya, as we all should be aware, are parts of the Russian Federation, right? They're territories in the Russian Federation. However, there are long-standing historical ethnocentric conflicts between the Dagestanis and the Chechens, even though both share a common religion. They are both Muslim states inside of the Russian Federation, predominantly Muslim states. Kadyrov has accused one of the senators to the Kremlin from Dagestan and two of the deputies in the Duma from Dagestan of having tried to assassinate him. And for all we know, that's true. I mean, I don't know that it's not anyway. But he has accused them of this, and he has publicly declared a blood feud against Dagestan. Now, I have repeatedly suggested that, in my opinion, when we look at the Russian Federation, it's a hodgepodge of conquered territories and ethnicities, all with their own histories and grudges against their neighbors. And there are dominoes to watch. In the normal course of events, the Kremlin rules through power and fear, violence and fear. And in the normal course of events, they would be able to squeeze the Dagestanis and the Chechens into shutting the fuck up and stopping their shit. But today, the Kremlin is weakened so badly, just like with the Azeris and the Armenians. It appears that they have no influence here. And Kadyrov is just talking shit. No one cares, angry man. Am I angry? Aw, give me a kiss, hey? Hey, Lars, how you doing, pal? Dagestan is chill mountain people. Nice, Trav. I'd like to find out someday. I'd like to see it. Anyway, it appears that the Kremlin is impotent in doing anything about this blood feud. And it makes sense because they are completely strained. All of their resources are committed to Ukraine. They are bursting at the seams. You're going to see. Now, look, you got 6 states in the Russian Federation that are having conferences around constitutional conventions and creating a federation of states separate from the Russian Federation led by Bashkortostan. If you look at a map and you look up Bashkortostan and you look at the 5 Russian states that are around it, they're all in a cabal already trying to break away. These are dominoes to watch. And increasingly, we're going to see these dominoes fall, in my opinion, as the centralized power of the Kremlin to control the Russian Federation through fear and force is degraded. These separatist movements are going to gain ground, and I think that the inevitable consequence will be a Soviet breakup 2.0, and there is nothing any of us can do to stop it. No, nobody in the West is feeding any military kit to any of the Russian Federation states. Hey, Samso, how you living, pal? Now, unless Walter, you're aware, I mean, I'm not aware of any active separatist movement inside of Dagestan. But if there were, I would hope the CIA is helping them. I would hope that we're helping the armed rebellion in Bashkortostan, which you don't hear about because it's small. They don't have a lot of weapons. They don't have a lot of men. They're guys hiding up in the mountains trying to figure out a plan for when Russia falls apart, is basically what I understand is going on there. Something similar is happening in Tuva. Yeah, Rational Squirrel, we all do. Thanks, Colin. You think that North Korea is pushed by Russia to start something with South Korea. You know what I think? If this thing goes nuclear, it won't be the Russians who fire the nuke. It will be one of their proxies. It will be Belarus if the target is Ukraine. It'll be Tehran if the target is Israel. It'll be North Korea if the target is Seoul. That's my biggest fear in all of this. Yakutia, Irkutsk, that whole, why can't I think of it? Sakha, that whole Sakha region is a likely separatist. Absolutely. The problem is, Nightshade, there's no people there. You know, you look at the state of Tuva, there's, I think, 366,000 people in the whole state, and 1/3 of them are Russians. Only 2/3 of them are ethnic Tuvans who have their own language, their own religion, their own history, and want to be, and had their independence in 1992. From 1992 to 1994, they were not part of the Russian Federation. North Korea is blowing the roads close to South Korea. I had not heard about that. Or Tokyo, Mel. It's not impossible. I think it's not probable. I don't think any of that is probable. But the longer that this thing goes on, the more probable these events become. It'll be just like 1989 to 1992. It'll happen fast. It'll be a domino effect. And there is nothing any of us can do to stop it. We can't stop the dissolution of the Russian Federation in the same way that we were powerless to stop the dissolution of the Soviet Union. TKS Daddy, you are not wrong. If Russia falls, North Korea may also fall. If this thing escalates, if Putin is able to spread this conflict, and it appears that he is doing everything that he can to do it, and the rest of us get involved with boots on the ground, it won't just be Russia that falls. It'll be North Korea. It'll be Iran. We're going to have to deal with these people sooner or later. Maybe we should ship South Korea ammo. I suggest, I don't know what any of that means. South Korea is one of the largest producers of ammunition in the world. The U.S. buys a lot of ammunition from South Korea. In fact, the South Koreans lent us, I don't know how many, tens of thousands of 155 millimeter NATO standard shells so that we could send what we had in our inventory to Ukraine. Let's get it over with. Look, we don't have to get it over with. The Ukrainians are doing all the heavy lifting. They're doing all the bleeding and suffering and dying. All we have to do is give them what they need to get the job done. They understand Russia in ways that we in the West never will. We get Russia wrong every time. The Ukrainians understand Russia. The Ukrainians suffered for 80 years under the most evil experiment in engineering human society that has ever been conducted. They know what it is to live under Russian occupation. This is what I think. So guys, real quick, let me thank Ballerina, who I didn't even mention yet today. Hey, F and Hell. There's F and Hell, guy with the best handle on Tickety Talk. I swear to God, I love that handle, man. Every time I see it, I smile. I want to thank Ballerina, who is the sponsor of tonight's live. If you see Ballerina around, give him a big thumbs up. Thank him for us. That dude is one of the big supporters of this channel. I saw another one here tonight. Chris Carter is here, whose support has been unwavering from about the beginning, as is Dark Irish and Bobby, Eli. There's a bunch of people here that you guys know I could not do this without you. David Keller, there's another one. Right? You guys are great. Big thanks to the moderator team, best moderators on the Tickety Talk. Cheyenne, Vanetta, PT, Jay, and Travis. Thanks, Bobby. It was funny, right? Big thanks to Nightshade, who has the Peters Peeps public group on the Book of Faces. That's where these live videos get posted after the fact, just as quick as I can. If you are a Patreon supporter, I am in the process. It should be live within the next hour, but the next video in the Dismantle 2025 series is finally up on the Patreon, or will be in the next hour. So look for that. There's more coming. Who I forgot to thank somebody. Oh, Vanetta Larrett, who has the Google Doc share, where if you're an American, or you're just interested, maybe you want to adapt them for your own MPs. We have letters to our Congress, Senate, and the White House on taking the handcuffs off Ukraine, support for Ukraine, etc. Something else. I'm forgetting somebody. Lars, my buddy Lars, who has the Alexievich archive and the Discord server. Okay. What do we got here? 1 minute left. Any other final questions? Are you anti-Trump? Yeah, I'm pro-democracy. If you're pro-democracy, you have to be anti-Trump. You look at the shit, the bullshit, the grievance-ridden lies of Project 2025. That is not democracy. That is fascism, black and white. I don't know. You have to be functionally illiterate to be a Trump supporter. I swear to God. Or have brain damage. Or just be a racist piece of shit. That's the only... I saw one Trump supporter, he was like, why is it that all the Biden supporters are college educated? Right? What are they teaching them that they believe in Biden and not Trump? Motherfucker, you are so close to understanding your situation. I should explain, I am not a Democrat. Joe Biden is not my guy. The Democrats are far too conservative for me. Far too conservative. I align much more closely with AOC. Now, that's my personal politics, right? That does not factor in, or maybe it does. I don't know. Maybe I wouldn't be in Ukraine if I weren't that person. But what I see happening here in Ukraine is an existential fight between the forces of progress and democracy in the world and the rules-based order and the courts of Kremlin chaos, insistent on dragging us back into a world where only the elites, so-called elites, live wealthy lifestyles, and everyone else is the peasant class. You think wealth inequality in the United States is bad? In Russia, I can give you the list of the 400 people that own 99.98% of Russia's wealth. 400 fucking people. That concentration of wealth in the hands of 400 people, less than 0.00001, 5 zeros, percent of the population, is what Trump and the other billionaires in the U.S. who support their backward nonsense would have us all living in. Rather than new equality and new ways to get or eliminate wealth inequality, we'd have the opposite. And for those of you, and look, I am a capitalist. I am a free market capitalist. However, I am not a laissez-faire capitalist. You look at somebody like Jeff Bezos, who invented Amazon and changed the way that everything works, right? Good for him. Does he deserve his wealth? Yeah, he does. Should he be able to exploit American workers, keep them from reasonable working conditions to make his money? No, he should not. Should he be able to prevent them from unionizing and collectively bargaining? No, he should not. Should he be taxed heavily because his creation would not exist were it not for the investments of the American people to create the public internet? He couldn't exist if we had not invested and created the public internet. Should he be taxed heavily, and should those taxes go to figure out how to re-encourage and revitalize American Main Street that he put out of business? Fuck yeah, they should be. That's how the world works. That's how it should work. Thanks, John. Good night. Hey, Clay, good night. All right, so we are over time. We are past time. I will get off my soapbox now. And I will thank everybody for sticking with me for this last hour. Thank you all so much. Heard of an Amazon that wants to go up 68 cents a square foot. Homeowner, 5.98 a square foot. I'm not sure what you mean, Fitz. Send me a message. I'm not translating that properly. Night, Birdie. Night, Trav. Good night, Mary Ellen. Good night, John Boy. Good night, Samso. Good night, Robert Stewart Key. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Arne. Thanks, Nicola. Good night, Bobby. All right. So, guys, especially the Patreon folks, especially the subscribers on... Hey, subscribers on TikTok. I put out a subscriber-only video this week. And to show you just how much TikTok is suppressing me, it hasn't been viewed by any subscribers. Now, you would think you put out a subscriber-only video, it would be pushed to your subscribers, right? No, nobody has seen it. So if you go to my page and you're a subscriber, you should see the subscriber-only video there from a couple days ago. Take a look. I've got just a message in there for you guys. And for the Patreon folks, look for some more stuff coming out on the Patreon page. For everybody else, for the followers, for the subscribers, for the Patreon people, I literally could not do this without you. I'm deeply appreciative. Thank you for joining me. And because you are here for me, I can be here in Ukraine for you. Thanks, guys. Make it a good night.